Welcome, fans of the Justice League universe. My name is Sam.
And my name is Sydney.
And we are two members of the JLU podcast team who enjoy analyzing the DC films released by Warner Brothers Studios. Other contributors to this analysis are Alessandro Maniscalco and Rebecca Johnson.
You can find us all on Twitter individually, and you can follow the show at JLU Podcast.
In this episode, we are going to discuss scene 31 of Wonder Woman, directed by Patty Jenkins, and this is probably the most popular and most iconic scene of the film, I would say. It's No Man's Land, and it's Diana's full-blown arrival as Wonder Woman, and she's out there in the world of man doing her thing. So, big classic scene, and we'll start as usual with a kind of overarching view of what this scene accomplishes overall in the movie, or some of the themes that kind of like are at a top level of this scene. So what are your first thoughts about that, Sydney?
This is the absolute most amazing scene in the movie to me, and I can remember when I saw it on opening night, there was this group of I think teenage girls in front of me who were just crying.
Yeah.
I wanted to cry. It was I don't know, it's a very sweet scene, very epically shot, and it perfectly encapsulates what Wonder Woman is as a character.
I think it's kind of one of those like chills scenes, like where you get chills that come down, and I definitely heard a lot of people, even when this, was first opening in theaters, a lot of people saying that this was the scene where they like all bonded as a group, like we're watching this movie and we're all feeling these emotions and stuff of her like finally coming out. And there's the character and there's the story and stuff, and we've seen her as a little girl coming to this moment, but I think there's also the meta-textual stuff about female superheroes, female empowerment, like this movement of women kind of getting more equal status in society. And so I think there's all those layers that some of them are hard to even put into words, but they're somehow embedded in this scene as she is climbing up the ladder and stepping out onto the battlefield. And she can do this thing that men were telling her that she couldn't do, and she's like, well, I'm gonna do it, so let's just do it. So there's so many of those layers to it. I think it's hard to even describe, but they're definitely there.
Right, and it even kind of I think we're seeing her that she's actually a superhero here rather than even just a normal person. Like I think before when she's fighting men in the alleyway, you see that she's a very powerful fighter and she's really skilled, but this is the first scene you get where it's like, oh my god, she can deflect bullets, she can take on machine gun fire. So this is where she becomes larger than life.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you said how it's your favorite scene in the film, and I've said this before in a lot of our analysis, but it's really whenever I'm watching any movie, I'm always looking for those really standout scenes, because I always keep in mind that if it's a great film, it's going to have great scenes, like those scenes that just work. The music is working, the cinematography, the acting, the performance, how it fits into the story. And they need to be those scenes that people remember, and they almost become cultural touchstones. Like, in our society, there are just certain movie scenes where if you just mention them, like anybody who's seen it knows exactly what you're talking about. Like, oh, I'm never going to forget that scene. I'm never going to forget that scene.
Right.
And for me, this is the one from Wonder Woman. It's like, okay, if you've seen this movie, you're never going to forget her coming out into No Man's Land.
No, and it seemed to blow a lot of fans' minds when Patty Jenkins says that this scene almost wasn't in the movie.
Yeah,
it's impossible to imagine.
Right, yeah. Some people have overblown that as like the WB executives were all trying to get it cut out of the movie, and if you actually listen to Patty Jenkins, she was saying like some crew people were not sure like what purpose it was serving, and they're like, hey, could we get rid of it? So it was people involved in the making of the film that were not sure it was necessary, but Patty Jenkins really knew what it was doing, and she knew that she had to have it in there. So she was definitely keeping it in. So there was a little bit of discussion about it, and there were at least some people who didn't understand like why it was such an important scene, or what it was going to look like at the end of the day.
Right, that's understandable, because I guess filming it's it's going to be Gal Gadot standing out in the middle of a field, standing still, pretending bullets are getting shot at her. There isn't that same level of kinetic energy on the set as there would be in, after post-production, after they add in the visual effects and the music. Because the music is a big part of it too.
Oh, huge, yeah. It kind of takes center stage. I mean, it's basically Diana and the music, the sound design puts everything else kind of in the background, and the music just swells to like full volume,
Right. It's not as it's not as action focused as the following scene is in Veld.
Right.
So yeah, it really is entirely thematic, I think, is what makes this scene powerful. And maybe on set that's more difficult to convey in words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actually have Patty Jenkins' quote here, so I'm going to read this verbatim here. So, quote from Patty Jenkins. It's my favorite scene in the movie, and it's the most important scene in the movie. It's also the scene that made the least sense to other people going in, which is why it's a wonderful victory for me. I think that in superhero movies, they fight other people, they fight villains. So when I started to really hunker in on the significance of No Man's Land, there were a couple people who were deeply confused, wondering like, well, what is she going to do? How many bullets can she fight? And I kept saying, it's not about that. This is a different scene than that. This is a scene about her becoming Wonder Woman, end quote.
Although her deflecting all those bullets is also really cool.
Yeah, it is, and it's visually very thematic, kind of like you're saying, but it's not like your typical action scene like you mentioned for like the next one is where the action stunt people get to do all their business on the next scene.
Right, yeah. There's not even a lot of dialogue like you mentioned.
Right. Deborah Snyder here will share a little bit of quote too, so producer on the film, and this is Deborah Snyder in the Art and Making of the Film book. She said, quote, "The moment Diana emerges from the trenches in her Wonder Woman armor is an incredibly inspiring and iconic moment. We see her proudly adorned in the armor of her people as she makes the noble choice to put her mission aside to help a village of people in grave danger. She risks everything to save innocent people. In this moment, she is bravery and love personified. She is the true definition of a hero," end quote. And so, yeah, I think it's not just how the No Man's Land scene was shot and the music, it's also what led up to it. Like her being able to talk to that woman and the woman saying, you know, we're all kind of like entrapped here in this village and we're really in pain and stuff. And Diana empathizes with that pain, and she's seen all the horror of the war and the men telling her like, we can't do that. We got to just keep on mission. So all of that stuff builds up to being really, really meaningful when she steps out there.
Exactly. And it even kind of seems like, you know, she is putting sort of her own mission on hold because, you know, her mission, her goals are the same as Steve's, but she also has the urgent mission of needing to find and destroy the god of war. Mm-hmm. But when she sees the people suffering and she knows she can help, then she has to put it aside and do the noble thing, which is, you know, very heroic. Mm-hmm.
It connects to a couple themes that we talked about, like in terms of the character development and character traits. I mean, it really shows Diana's empathy because she empathizes for that village, even though she's only met like one of the women. But she's like, well, I need to help them. She can sense their pain. It also shows her bravery and that she's a person of action. Like, I'm going to do this. And it also connects to kind of a thread throughout the movie where when Diana exhibits some sort of heroism or leadership, then she inspires others to do it. And so we'll see that with the Oddfellows. Like when she steps out and takes that moment, then that inspires other people to like, oh, I can do it. I can go and do this thing as well.
Exactly.
So that's a nice thread, you know, between it. And she really is literally going out there first and in front.
Mm-hmm. There's a few things too. These, you know, just random bits of trivia, but there are a couple different possible influences of this scene. Mm-hmm. One was on Twitter a couple years ago from a user called Scarlet's Gomorrah, and it said that this image of Wonder Woman taking the field may have been inspired by sort of like a legend about the Angels of the Mons, and it's about a war from the beginning of World War I, where the British, against all odds, were defeated. Well, they ended up retreating, but they took out a large number of German soldiers, and it seemed like the odds were against them. And certain troops ended up spreading a rumor that they were angels assisting them on the battlefield. Maybe this was a way of coping with the realities of war and how much more violent than they were expecting it to be. But it says that there were even reports of what soldiers believed to be Joan of Arc, or a mysterious female figure clad in ancient armor. So it seems like there's some connection here, but it's a popular image. There was also a personification of America, which was called Columbia. Mm-hmm. And it's the same sort of thing. She was this sort of angelic figure who around both world wars was invoked in American posters for recruitment. Mm-hmm. And so she was depicted as wearing an American flag in some way, much like Wonder Woman is in the comics, and carrying a sword. It all kind of sort of emphasizes Wonder Woman as this mythological figure in a world of men.
Yeah, and just tapping into these images, and when people are reading Wonder Woman or being exposed to her, it's some of it's even subconscious. Like we don't realize that it's tapping into some other things that we've seen or we've just soaked up from the culture.
Right. It's not even just that she's a warrior or, a superhero. She's a goddess. It's something even higher. You're right. It definitely, these stories are part of the human subconscious. These sort of tales pop up in multiple cultures, and this is sort of like the American version of it, the American superhero.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, for such an iconic, rich scene, let's get into some of the flow of it here. So we'll pick up here where she, has told her, it's what I'm going to do, and she has put on the tiara, which of course is very meaningful from Antiope and stuff. And the filmmakers have been saving up this whole reveal for the costume. So the robe now drops. It's kind of been muddied by the mud of the trenches and stuff, but she drops that down. To me, it's kind of like she's shedding the cover that she had to wear in Man's World. She's like, no, I'm not going to like cover myself or hold back anymore. I'm going to like completely let it out, and I'm going to shed your muddiness kind of off of me and bring my kind of Amazonian side of things to it. And then we get the kind of close-ups and emphasis on each of the parts of the iconic like Wonder Woman costume. And I think these close-ups to it are part of what makes it iconic. We get each of the elements. The tiara obviously is where we start, which is we covered a little bit in the last scene. But now we get to see the boots, we see this shield, we see, the whole outfit as she's going up the ladder.
Right. And one thing I appreciated too when I watched it is that it's very non-sexual, because, a lot of people have commented, and it's even sort of mentioned in the movie a few times, that it is a somewhat revealing outfit, or it mostly just shows a lot of her legs and arms. So when they do the reveal, when she drops the cloak, it doesn't focus on any part of her body in any way. It focuses on the shield, like you said, her various parts of her armor. And yeah, it's just a very brilliant reveal when you see the whole thing together.
Mm-hmm. And I think it really pays off that they've saved, like we've gotten these little glimpses of it, so we knew it was there, but we saved the full on, okay, we can really see it for this moment. And so with the music swelling up and then really getting a clear vision of it, and then when she's emerges, then we see the whole outfit, in its entirety. They just planned it out really well from the beginning of this movie to right now, like an hour and 15 minutes in.
It's not even just like the music swelling; it's the explosion right behind her.
Oh yeah,
when you see her
fireworks
for the first
almost.
time.
Yeah,
it's just this big epic reveal.
Yeah, and it's one more thing too before we get out onto that battlefield. She does the camera spins around her as the costume is being revealed.
Oh, yeah.
And so multiple people have noticed that this is kind of an homage to Linda Carter, because in the old Wonder Woman show, she would spin and then she would have her Wonder Woman costume on. And so in this case, it's like the camera spins and then she has her costume on now. So that's kind of nice. And to me, what I noticed about it was that camera spin also happened back on Themyscira when she was going to dive into the water. So that was her, like, she was going to take a leap forward and take a big action to do something.
It was like her metaphorically becoming Wonder Woman.
Yeah, at that point. That was definitely a step forward for her, and now here's another big one. And in both cases, the camera kind of like swings around her in like a circle. Right.
And Patty mentioned that this was deliberate, right, in this scene?
Yeah, it was, I think, confirmed.
That's great.
for this one here to be like a Linda Carter homage. Yeah, that's kind of... I thought that was a really, like, clever way to do it, because to have her spin with her arms out would be a little too on the nose. But this was a nice way to do it.
Yeah, it was more subtle, and this time when I was rewatching it, I really like when the camera pans around and you could see the faces of the soldiers who are looking at her, and how they go from just sort of neutral to, shocked and awed. So it really adds to the feeling of epicness, I guess.
Yeah, and like even Steve, who knows her better than anybody, in Man's World, he is even saying, like, Diana, like, he yells out, like, he's worried that she's about to go get herself killed. So he's like also shocked at like what she's doing. But Alessandro pointed out in our notes that this really is showing that the men have all completely underestimated her, right? Like, they view her just as a woman, which to them is like a lower kind of thing. Like, she wouldn't have anything to contribute on the battlefield, right? She's a woman. But now she drops her cloak, so she's like unleashing her full abilities. And men are about to realize, like, oh, we might have been underestimating like what she can contribute to the effort.
Right. I think until they see her deflecting the bullets, I think they're just completely shocked. Like, what the heck is this? It just came completely out of left field.
Yeah. So she steps up the ladder and she's stepping into the light. She's also kind of revealing herself to the men, at least around here, right? Like, so she's, revealing her powers and everything like that. But, we see the parts of her costume, then we see her full costume, and now we go into the main part of the scene. So now she's out there in no man's land. You mentioned the explosion coming behind her, and the music is really building. By the way, with the music, I really like it that they didn't use the typical Wonder Woman theme. I like that they kept that one more for the action scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And here it's much more of like emotional kind of swelling, like more dramatic and rich rather than like action and driving.
Right.
And this one, to me, some of the motifs that are happening are more like a callback to Themyscira, which I thought was appropriate because she's like bringing in a big dose of Amazonian stuff right into this man's war.
Exactly. And Gregson Williams did a fantastic job with the score for this film.
Yeah.
He really got a lot of freedom to create themes for her, because in Batman v Superman, Wonder Woman, she only made her full appearance as Wonder Woman in sort of one scene towards the end of the film. Mm-hmm. So, the only music that Hans Zimmer got to score for her was, yes, this action scene. And that is, it's a wonderful scene. And yes, it's perfect for this upcoming scene in Veld. Mm-hmm. But for this scene, it really required something more, not softer, but like dramatic, sort of more inspiring music.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that especially for this scene, Gregson Williams really rose to the challenge. And now I can even just listen to the music and I have all the emotions coming back from like seeing this, in theaters and stuff.
Right. I'm hoping they bring him back for future films, or that future composers for other team-up movies will use his themes for Wonder Woman.
Yeah. Now, when we're out here, we've seen her, so the first part of it is really to see her costume and stuff. And then we have this bullet time kind of thing where, we have slow-mo following the bullet as it's heading towards her. It's kind of a longer shot approaching her. And then she uses the bracelet deflection, which is, of course, like a big part of the character. And she deflects quite a few bullets with her bracelets in this scene, which is a big, nod to the comic books where they have even the game like Bullets and Bracelets, right, in the original comic books. So you're seeing she did that a little bit before, like you mentioned, but this is like, big time Bullets and Bracelets that she's having to do.
Right. I saw mentioned here that some people, and actually my own mother brought this up, that it seemed a bit concerning that the Germans fired at this beautiful woman walking towards them the second she popped up. Like, why would they do that? And I don't know. I mean, trying to determine if that's a realistic thing is impossible because it's a movie. Dramatically, it's better that she, comes out fighting. But I think if you were going to do some apologetics for that, one thing would be that no one's popping out over the trench. The whole point of trench warfare is you're stuck in the ditch, because if you pop your head up, you're going to get shot. So it could be just that it didn't really register with them that it was a woman yet. They just saw something move and they shot at it. But then after they fire a few bullets at her and she reflects them, then you see one of the German soldiers say something like, "My God," and like they realize, oh, this isn't normal, and so then they keep shooting at her once they realize she's a threat.
Yeah, this is interesting to kind of think about. One of our listeners, who just goes by the letter B on YouTube, he said he got really angry at the Germans for shooting at her, without provocation, so to speak. Right. But, and yeah, I mean, based on my limited understanding of like the rules of engagement for warfare, if the Germans know that there at that time were not any female soldiers and she didn't have on any military gear, didn't have a gun, visible, I think it is against the rules of engagement to just like shoot her down. But I'm sure lots of stuff, happened in the trenches and in no man's land that was against the rules of engagement.
Yeah, all's fair.
Yeah, exactly. So for Diana, we also kind of as a team in our notes, we were thinking about like, what's Diana think of the Germans? She views them as under Ares' influence. So of course they're going to immediately shoot at her because she's like, yeah, like Ares is just, manipulating them into being bad people, but they aren't necessarily bad like on their own. That's what she thinks at this point.
But since we know that they're not actually under any kind of influence, they just shot at this woman.
Yeah.
But I think it was, I mean, like you said, this was sort of in bullet time. It's in slow motion. I'm thinking they could have shot at her. If you really need an explanation for the scene, then they shot at her before they realized what she was.
Yeah, just they see a person coming out of the trench, so you
Yeah,
shoot. Yeah,
something, anything popping its head
she
over.
was not waving a white flag, so.
Exactly. But anyways, to the action.
Yeah, Charlie calls out, what's she playing at? So he doesn't know what the heck's about to happen, and he figures she's about to probably get herself killed.
Right.
But yeah, she's able to, deflect a few more. I really like the way that Gal Gadot like performs it with her face. I kind of like the look that she has on her face for that. And then it's like you said, the Germans are like, all right, let's all open fire. She's deflecting bullets. So, and then that ups the intensity a little bit, because then she starts to go into kind of a jog and is still deflecting them. So
right.
I like the build too, like the music builds and then the motion kind of builds. So it has some momentum to the scene.
Right.
Even though there's not like a ton of action, it still has this like feeling of going forward.
Exactly. And even even Gal Gadot's face during these scenes, like you said, those first few bullets that she deflects in slow motion, she almost looks amazed, I think, that she could do that. So, it's almost kind of like the reveal of Wonder Woman for her too. It's like, she's discovering something new about herself in this moment. And, she was going to go out there onto that field anyways, but, it's kind of like, wow, I'm more powerful even than I thought I was.
So that makes me think of, that it's a character trait, because even young Diana, she would jump before she really knew how it was going to turn out.
Exactly.
And here she's like, I'm going to climb out of this trench and go save the people before I even know what I'm personally capable of. So
luckily her natural gifts can back her up.
Yeah.
But this is a journey of self-realization for her in many ways. So
yeah,
it fits.
And then here we get a little bit of the leadership that we mentioned before. So like Steve says, she's taking all the fire, so let's go. So in World War I, like you were saying, they're down in these trenches just all the time. And World War I is well known for being like, the front not moving much at all for like years, like we're just at a standstill. And so to actually have a chance to break through the front is like a big deal. And so Steve calls, hey, we can go forward too. And so the other soldiers on the British side start to climb out. And some of them do. Like Steve goes out first, and then eventually the other like British soldiers are going to come in too.
Well, the others are held back because they don't know Diana. They're just like, this is crazy.
They're still not quite sure, yeah.
Right. But I think when they see Steve and the rest of them run out, they're just like, what are they doing? These people are all insane.
Yeah, so it's like Diana's first, then the Oddfellows are second, and then the British soldiers will come up third.
Oh, yes. And I think the moment where all the other soldiers come over, that's probably my favorite moment in this, the entire scene being my favorite scene. That's just my favorite moment.
Oh, yeah.
Because that really does show how she's inspired them. The best parts of these superhero characters, whether it be Wonder Woman or Superman, are, how they're able to inspire people.
Mm-hmm. And the filmmaking kind of inspires me because she goes forward and then she gets to the point where she's pretty close to them at the other trench, and then she pulls out her shield. And this part, just the filmmaking, is really amazing to me because they have, the production design of, the landscape around them. They have the dust, the dirt, like, getting blasted up and stuff. Mm-hmm. But just the way that they positioned Gal Gadot with her left arm on the shield and her right arm like clenched behind her is just so intense. I love that like body
it's a power
positioning.
Pose.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Even though it's just a defensive thing and she's just kind of staying there, like it has the intensity and the muscle, and she's clenching and stuff. And the filmmakers covered it from multiple angles. Like we get a close up on it, we kind of come out from a side shot, then we get like an overhead shot, and I just love the kind of coverage that they gave to it to really let this moment sink in. And and I like too the overhead shot, which to me like connected back to I think an overhead shot in the alleyway where it's like, all right, cool, when she's really doing some stuff, it's fun to see her almost from like straight above.
Right, and it's beautiful to see the sparks sort of shooting off of her shield.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that pop of color in this scene. I know that the entire DCEU, as we call it, it's always criticized as being really dark, but there's always a reason that the scenes are shot this way. I know we talked about this in our commentary for the film, but this scene especially, it's no man's land, it's trench warfare. Of course, everything is going to be gray and drab. But there's so many of these flashes of like fire in the background and all those gold sparks from bullets hitting her metal gauntlets. Just these warm colors. that it just really makes the whole thing come alive to me. And it looks lovely, like a painting.
Yeah. And when she first came out too, like,
Hmm.
her costume is not like shiningly bright colors. It has a little bit more
No,
color to it than BVS did, but it's still, just these kind of warm, rich colors.
right.
But by making the landscape around it so like gray and dark green and like dusty and stuff, then her costume like just looks awesome when she comes out of the trench. And
Yeah, it
then,
really
like you
stands
say,
out.
yeah, and then the bullets flying and the violence of that, the sparks, those stand out too. So it's like, yeah, I mean, to me, the filmmakers know exactly what they're doing. They think a lot about the color that they're gonna put, in this scene.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we get the epic coverage from a lot of angles of her with the shield. That's to me a great centerpiece of the scene. And then we see Steve moving in. Now, speaking of camera angles, part of me kind of wishes that they would have kept a left to right thing like through the whole scene.
Mm.
Like Diana starts on the left and the Germans are on the right, and then everything is always kind of moving left to right, and the Germans are always on the right side of the screen. That would be my preference. Or the straight on stuff is also cool. Like they go straight on to Diana. That makes a lot of sense because that's kind of like a powerful positioning and stuff.
Hmm.
But there's one shot of Steve running up in the middle of this scene, and he's running from right to left, and I'm like just not quite sure why the filmmakers did that. Because to me, I'm like totally mapping it in my mind as all from left to right, and then all of a sudden Steve's going the other way.
Oh,
I
I
don't know
have to
why.
see
So
that.
yeah, it's not a big deal at all,
It's just
but
a
for
little bit,
me, it's
yeah.
like I like it when there's really consistent kind of momentum to the scene, and they
Hmm.
might have done it on purpose to try to mix it up a little bit, but if I were doing it, I would have just had it all going from left to right.
Yeah, it's just something you notice.
Yeah. And then when Steve like gets to his crouching position, he is coming from left to right. So I don't know why they had him like running the other way, but
Maybe
it's okay.
it's chaos. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be a little bit.
Hmm.
But then we get the Oddfellows, have joined Diana. She's still taking the fire, but the Oddfellows are now like at her side. So that's kind of the next beat in the scene.
Oh yeah, and so this is when she's kind of frozen, because she's taking fire from the machine gun, right? So
Yeah, she's kind of gone about as far as she can.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's stuck in that position, and then Chief throws a grenade over, and I guess it hits
Hmm.
the guy who's firing the machine gun, and then she realizes that she has an opening, so she keeps going, and that's when everybody else pops out of the trench.
Yeah. So exactly. Yep. Go now. They are like okay. She has broken through. Now the British soldiers kind of come up in.
Yeah, it's nice because she created an opening for the Oddfellows to follow her, and
Hmm.
now they've created one for her to continue on. So it's really a group team effort now.
Hmm. Yep, that's right, that's right. So now we get all the British soldiers running up, and this is then the Wonder Woman leap. So she leaps into the trench. I really like the music here, and I like the idea. The leap doesn't look perfect, but
Mm.
I'm kind of like so swept up in the emotion of the scene and stuff that I don't really care about that part.
Right. Yeah, there's a few shots in this film where I think like the CGI is a little less than perfect,
Hmm.
but it's, minor quibble
Right. The
for the
emotion
most
is,
part.
yeah,
Hmm.
the meaning of the scene is so good that that stuff doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
And one of my favorite things, is when she gets into the trench that she smashes the big machine gun, like the mounted gun.
Right. Yeah.
And I like that because we noticed it as a team. We noticed it several times throughout the movie that she destroys the instruments of war.
Hmm.
So she's not really trying to fight the people so much. She thinks they're maybe under Ares' influence or whatever, and she will kill people if she has to, within the battle. But really, they emphasize in the filmmaking, they emphasize her taking out the instruments of war, like a tank or here, this machine gun, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's right. Because I think in this scene, once she punches a few guys in the trench there, yeah, she goes straight for the machine gun, and then she goes to Veld.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
So for her, it's she wants to save the innocent people, and she wants to take out these instruments of destruction.
and by taking out the machine gun, that makes it possible for the rest of the men to follow.
Hmm.
The next scene in Veld, she definitely knocks some guys around, but they are definitely directly shooting at her in close quarters. So
Yeah. Or she
there's
takes
really
out.
no other way to deal with them.
Yeah. Yeah. She's not opposed to killing somebody who is a direct threat to herself or others.
If she
But
absolutely has.
I like it where they emphasize like she's also going to take out all those the instruments of warfare. So I like that a lot. And when she gets in the trench, she can see the village. Like she can kind of see the church tower, and like she knows that, oh, that's the village that I'm looking for. And so she yells at Steve. So she's, still thinking, I'm not here to take out all these Germans. The British, that's their thing. She really wants to go save the innocent people who she has learned about. So for her, she's, that's what she's going to do.
Right. That's the goal here. Oh, there's another little detail that I really like about this scene, and I guess the way that it's filmed in general is so in those scenes when she's running up towards the German line and deflecting bullets, it looks like, I don't know if she's kicking up dirt or if it's shrapnel, but they do that thing where some dirt gets on the camera lens.
Oh yeah.
And kind of sticks there. So it really feels very gritty, and it feels more, it feels more real. So like you really can feel that they did it on a set somewhere.
Another thing about when she's holding her shield and she's in that pose, like it looks like there's really bullets hitting her shield. Like they really did a believable job of having that. It doesn't just look like they have a wind machine on her. It's like, no, it looks like there's actual objects hitting her shield at high speed.
Yeah, like a ricochet, and it twitches, and yeah, just little things like that. It just feels very rough, and it just sort of emphasizes how strong Diana is.
Yep.
Ugh, just the whole thing.
Yeah, it's all really good. And we mentioned before the music being more like Amazonian kind of music, and we talked about that a lot. But I especially like it when she jumps down into the trench, like so after her leap. Then Gregson Williams, like he brings back the Amazon intervals. I think it's like an AE and then AG. And he had established those at the first part of the movie. And so when he brings back those intervals, to me, it works really well. So I like that Gregson Williams, was able to bring in some of his own original ideas and then find the spots to bring in the Zimmer Junkie XL kind of theme. So definitely good stuff there. She jumps into the trench, she jumps out. That's kind of a little cool thing. But yeah, I think... we've been talking about this scene, but I think in a lot of ways this scene really works in a way that doesn't need to be explained. I know I'm saying this at the end of our episode, but to me it's almost one of those scenes where it's like just have people sit down and watch it and let the music roll over them and let the imagery hit them. And we maybe should have just shut up and not said anything about it and just let it hit our eyeballs.
It's real artistry. It's the music and the images coming together. The scene itself doesn't really need words, but no, it's one of those things where either let it speak for yourself or I could gush about it forever, and that would probably wear on people's patience. So one tiny little detail. So, next scene they're going to Veld. So we're going to see this just a little bit where Chief throws a grenade. We're going to see him do that later.
Yep. It seems to be one of his skills.
Yeah, exactly. Everything they can contribute.
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting now is like Diana has exerted herself as leader, and then she will explicitly become leader because she'll say she said, Steve, let's go. Like, so it's kind of like the jockeying for leadership, like Steve has kind of been the leader. Like he knew London more. He was kind of saying like, hey, we need to do this. But now Diana's like, you know what? I'm not sure if you're always the leader. Sometimes I might be the leader. So I think that's fun to see that dynamic playing out too.
I don't know that I don't think she's deliberately trying to step on his toes or anything. I think she definitely just feels that this is her area. This is she's the one who knows best in this moment. So it's natural that everyone else follow her lead.
Yeah. And then I think, but later it'll be like unclear, like whose lead should we follow? Like at the gala, for instance, like Steve kind of wants to do one thing and she wants to do another thing.
Right.
And so she doesn't throw it in his face like, hey, remember what I did before? Maybe you should listen to me. But to me, you can trace through this movie. You can kind of see like, how do they work together, Steve and Diana, and when does one take the lead over another? And you can kind of trace that. It's kind of one fun way to watch the movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, you definitely can. They certainly clash at that point when suddenly, they have different ways of doing things, and that's inevitably going to clash. I just kind of feel like she has this idea of like natural leadership, kind of like earlier, like the generals. She doesn't believe they deserve their authority because they don't act as honorably as the generals that she's known. So the generals that she knew, they were people who led by example.
Definitely.
So yeah. I think that to her, leadership is less an appointment than it is something that it's just natural. It's whoever is best for the job, whoever is the one taking action, whoever is most knowledgeable about whatever's going on. She mostly was content to follow Steve's lead back in London because he clearly knew more about the place than she did, even if she thought that some of it was really strange. But in this moment, yeah, she's the one with the confidence. She knows what to do here, so she definitely expects that they will follow her.
All right, so I think that will be our analysis of scene 31. So that was a fun one to do. A lot of fun talking to you about it, Sydney.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to talk about it.
So next up, we will, ratchet the action up even a bit more, like we already alluded to. But in the meantime, if you're looking for other podcasts, we always recommend Suicide Squad Cast and Man of Steel Answers.